the founder-friendly Alternatives to VC panel, so if you're looking for anything else, you're in the wrong spot. But you might find it interesting nonetheless. My name is Zach Steven. I'm going to be moderating the panel tonight. We'll do introductions in just a minute, but just wanted to say welcome to everyone. Thank you for being here. Really excited to elevate this conversation in this community, and it means a lot that on relatively short notice you're all here. And I'm excited for what the panel has to say, as well as what the conversations and the questions from the community might be. So first off, stellar panel of Minnesota founders. Thanks for being here. Special guest Bryce in town from Indy VC. So thanks again for being here and a part of the panel. This is a fantastic opportunity to have a conversation that's different from some of the narratives that we're hearing predominantly today. So I also wanted to say a special thank you to our sponsors, starting out with Ellie at Meta, facilities and social media. But if you would, just say a couple of words about Meta.
Yeah, so for those of you, you walked into Meta's lobby, we are a nonprofit that serves minority entrepreneurs. We have been around since 1971. We came out of the racial riots that were happening back in the early 70s, late 60s. We were founded by 7 kind of poignant community leaders and 15 founding corporations who are still involved with Meta today. And we serve minority entrepreneurs in several ways. We offer free business consulting services. We have a revolving loan fund. We started a mergers and acquisitions department. It's for those baby boomers who are starting to retire and don't have that second generation or third generation. We are trying to find minority entrepreneurs to match them up with. We sold 13 companies last year, so it was really exciting. Sorry, I'm out of breath. Those stairs kill me. I like the elevator. We also have several programs and initiatives happening right now. We partner with Junior Achievement to start an entrepreneurial program in St. Paul Central High School with high school entrepreneurs, and Harding just up the way here, or Patrick Henry, sorry. And we're expanding to 4 high schools next year. So really great program. We also have, as you saw, we had our mini MBA program. So we have 16 companies in that program right now. We had 16 last year. Really great program for minority entrepreneurs to expand their breadth of being an entrepreneur. So lots of great things. We have an amazing free annual meeting. You're welcome to come join us. Kind of the same setup. We have a great quick meeting, a free huge networking reception over at the Ordway on June 3rd. We'd love for you all to come and meet our board members, meet our founders, meet our funders, meet our clients. They're amazing people, and Nicola is one of them. And another big thing we have happening is our $1 Million Challenge for Minority Entrepreneurs. Amelia is a winner of that, which is a Shark Tank type event for minority entrepreneurs. The applications are due June 13th. So lots of fun things going on. Thank you so much for coming. You're a great group. Very chatty, but welcome and thank you so much. Enjoy your panel.
Great, thank you, Ellie. Yeah, this is a pretty amazing facility, and it's so new that when I was looking at the Google Maps Earth view, it was just grass. And I'm like, I can't use that image in telling people where to go. It's not quite that casual of an event, but it's great to be here and nice that the space was available and glad to have them as a sponsor as well. So, as you can see on the slides as well, Cloudburst SBC, I'm a founder there. A number of our team are here. We're a startup studio based in Northeast Minneapolis, and we work with passionate founders to help them turn their ideas into tech and tech-enabled businesses, and have a product offering that's inspired a lot by the people on the panel that's more founder-friendly agreement for ways to contribute services in exchange for future upside instead of money. So really excited about this space. I'm glad to be able to pull the panel together, be a part of hosting it. And also have to mention Earnest Capital. Some of you may know Kevin McArdo in town here. He's an investor in Earnest Capital. They're also an option for early stage bootstrapped companies. They provide, let me read their words here, early stage funding, resources, and a network of experienced advisors to founders building sustainable, profitable businesses. And they also have a funder-aligned funding mechanism via a shared earnings agreement. So a big part of the conversation tonight is alternative types of instruments, of which Indy VC has been a leader, Earnest Capital, Tiny Seed. There's a number of things here in town and nationally that are happening that are alternatives to this traditional narrative of the way that deals need to be structured. So Earnest Capital, they have a mentorship program. They're limited partners founders are also investors and mentors in the program, and they're accepting applications. So if you're a bootstrap technology entrepreneur, I definitely check out Earnest Capital. Kevin, on short notice, wasn't able to be here, but he's still committed to supporting the event. Also as a sponsor, Tech.mn, through his other company, SureSwift Capital, recently acquired Tech.mn, and he was pleased to sponsor this event and help elevate the kinds of conversations that we're having. So thank you to Kevin and Tech.mn and Earnest Capital in absentia. Quick bit about me, and then we'll turn it over to the panel, because that's really, I think, why people are here. But just to give you a context of why this conversation was interesting and kind of how it came together. So as I mentioned, I'm a partner at Cloudburst. This is a space that we operate in day to day. And I've had experience really on both sides of the conversation as a founder, raising money, growing companies, and now with Cloudburst, through this model that we've developed, we're working with hundreds of early stage entrepreneurs, having conversations, working on projects, and have developed a model that we see as a founder-friendly alternative for helping invest services in their business to help more people build more things and more people participate in the success of the growth of that company, but preserve options for the founder. So this is an area that's really an area of passion for us, and just great to see how this panel has come together again. I first started following Bryce probably 2 years ago or so, when he was kind of tweeting about IndieVC. Wasn't that long after that I met Thompson and found that we kind of had that in common. I'm excited to hear more in their own words about these models and what's interesting, but honestly, what was most compelling to me was not even just the instrument of how the funding happens, but the belief in software companies and startups as profit-making real businesses, not just speculation and kind of the classic, unicorn blitzscaling model that certainly has its place, but I think it gets a lot of people believing and listening to the wrong types of stories. And so I was really excited to hear about these alternative narratives, had these common connections with Thompson around these ideas, and just as a founder and hearing the frustrations from our clients, people who are spending their time and energy putting together pitch decks, trying to convince other people that their idea was worth merit, trying to expose the possibilities of other ways to get started and get funded. And there's a lot of things happening nationally, and I'm excited to see that there's a lot more things happening here locally as well. So with that, I'd like to start with a quick startup stand-up joke. Have you heard the one about the woman who bootstrapped her company with customer revenue? No, you haven't. And that's where we're going to change that narrative a bit, is there are people who are starting companies, running businesses, running them in a non-traditional, classically traditional, like fundamentals of what a business is kind of way, but those stories aren't getting attention. So I am thrilled with this panel, opportunity to introduce them, and more like than that, have them introducing themselves. And just wanted to throw out a couple of statistics that I got from Bryce. I attended a session that they had in Chicago back in January, and some of the problems with venture capital currently, 98% of VC dollars flow to one gender, 80% of VC dollars flow to 3 states, not Minnesota, we must be 4. 1% of VC dollars flow to Black or Latino founders, and only 0.6% of businesses raise any VC dollars at all. So for at least for the mind share and the money and the power, the leverage that the VC as an industry gets, it's disproportionate to the variety of talents that exist. And so we're here to unpack that conversation a bit. So thank you again for being transparent, sharing that information, helping get the stories out there. And now let's turn it over to the panel for some introductions, because all of them really hardly need introduction in this community with the success that they've had over multiple companies, but I'm excited to hear it in their own words. And maybe let's start off with Anila Idnani, founder of HabitAware and other things.
Thank you for having me and for sponsoring this event. My name is Anila. I am an ex-hair puller, and hair pulling is a mental health condition. And our company, HabitAware, has created a smart bracelet that uses real-time gesture detection technology to bring awareness to things like hair pulling, skin picking, and nail biting, so that people with these debilitating conditions can use that power of awareness to take control and live a better life. So that's the company that we've started. That's really that's my focus right now. Got enough on my plate.
Great. Yeah, let's do a quick introduction from Bryce. Great.
Sure. I'm Bryce Roberts. I founded firm back in 2005 that we call O'Reilly Alphatech Ventures. OATV was one of the first institutional seed funds. So seed funding now is its own category. Back then when we started it, no one really knew what we were talking about, and it took us 2 years to raise our first fund, and no one believed that it was going to be anything, and now it is what it is. But it was an interesting position to be in, to kind of watch the evolution of a new kind of funding category emerge and to be a part of that back in those early days of seed. And we started a kind of a different conversation and a different opportunity around funding companies 4 years ago now, where we formalized it into something we call Indie.vc, where we focus entrepreneurs on raising revenue and getting to profitability, not helping them raise their next round of financing. And so, you know, the question of like, what would you invest in, what would you support if you didn't have to have their fundability a requirement for you to engage with it, was something we were really interested in exploring. I got into the venture business while living in Salt Lake City, Utah. And every year or every week I would fly to the Bay Area and I would see all of these companies that were raising money, and they were running this very classic Silicon Valley playbook, and then I would fly back home and I would look around at the entrepreneurs in Salt Lake who didn't have access to those same resources, and they were building these amazing companies that people said couldn't be built without gobs and gobs of venture capital. And they were scaling incredibly quickly. Companies that you've probably heard of now, like Qualtrics that got bought by SAP last year for $8 billion. Pluralsight that went public 2 years ago is now a $5 billion market cap company. All of those were built to a scale with little to no outside funding at all. And when I talk to those founders and when I come back and hear their stories, so much of the magic that happened in those companies didn't happen when they raised like mezzanine and growth capital that got them to, you know, the ultimate exits they achieved. It happened in those kind of 4 years of lean, focused, constrained growth. And yet in my day job, all I was trying to do was help people skip over that as quickly as possible. And so part of our thinking at NEVC is there's real value in living through those constraints, focusing on things you can control, not being at the whims of the market. And if you do that, I think there's a potential that we could unlock many, many more highly valued, interesting, world-changing companies that don't fall out of favor, that don't rely on somebody else to give them permission to exist. And so 4 years ago, we shifted the focus of OATV primarily to supporting entrepreneurs along those lines of NEVC, and we've developed programming and investment instruments to be able to support them along those lines. So that's the NEVC story.
Hello, I'm Kristen Womack, and yeah, I've been really interested in the intersection of software and solving problems for quite some time, and my background is in product management and building software, and yeah, I've always found these little pockets, and I've been really fortunate. I worked at Best Buy for a long time, and a lot of people think like, oh, you worked at a big company, but I got to work in these really small pockets that were like pushing the envelope, like Best Buy Capital, investing in companies that were out in Seattle, and I was a part of a joint venture between Best Buy and Carphone Warehouse, so doing things much differently than the regular company. So I was given a lot of permission to push the envelope a lot in that at my days at Best Buy, and I was eventually the head of the API platform. So I got to work with developers and builders, and that's always really been my sweet spot, is supporting people who are building other things. So during that time, I would fly to Boston and San Francisco and a lot of different places around the US, sponsoring hackathons and promoting our APIs. And I started seeing that there was definitely no one in the bathroom. When I went to the bathroom, it was like just me. And there would be like 6 women, and then I started looking into why women weren't at hackathons, and started reading a lot of stories about women just not wanting to get hit on in that, or have men try to ask them on a date, and then stories that were like the press came and interviewed the team about the team, but then they would turn to the woman and say, how do you like being, what is it like being the only woman on the team? And she's like, ask me about the idea, it was my idea, or ask me about the database I built, or ask me about, and so as I started seeing this all over, when I came back, we started, we had a meetup group, we started the Twin Cities Geekettes, and we were seeing that there just was not a pipeline problem, even though everyone said there's no women because it's the pipeline problem. They're not interested in technology. So then we decided, based on what we were seeing from that group, that they really wanted more. So we said, what if we just had a hackathon, like an all-weekend hackathon in Minneapolis? And at that point, I had never even heard of a hackathon being in Minneapolis. They were mostly in San Francisco or Boston or bigger cities. And we opened it up, 100 people registered. And before we opened the doors, we were like, holy shit, is anyone even gonna show up? This is gonna be awkward. And the doors opened and people flooded in, and that was 5 years ago. We've been running this hackathon. And we've served a lot of people in terms of women in the community, and then also we've brought together employers who are looking to see that there isn't a pipeline problem. Well, along the way, I've started a couple of different companies and started building different products. I've always been obsessed with solving problems, and when I was at Best Buy, they had a daycare on site. And during this time, I had a child, and so being a woman in tech, having a child was like a whole nother perspective that I started having a different experience around. And having this daycare on site, I learned a lot about the connection between a parent and a child, and watched a lot of women. There was like a nursing room, and people would come down to either feed their babies, bottle feed their babies, nurse their babies, but we would all sit around and talk. And so many women in that room talked about leaving the workforce to stay at home because there is no middle ground in this binary of stay at home or go to work. And so then it started the genesis of working on this problem called Hello Mom, and we iterated through a couple of different products before landing on what we're working on now, which is called Mina, and it's a marketplace platform for bringing parents to discover any type of care provider when you're starting your family or after your child arrives. Because anyone in the room who has a child knows that once they come, stuff's on a different timeline. Like it's not really up to you. It's this new person in your life. And so as we've done that, we've been in lots of twists and turns and funding and building, and I'm excited to be here and share more of that story.
I'm Thompson Adirkomi, and CEO and co-founder of Nice Healthcare. And Nice Healthcare is a primary clinic without walls that comes to you. You know, it's everything primary care should be, and it costs less to boot, if you can imagine that. And you know, my background is I'm a health economist, statistician, and I thought that's what I would do for a long time until I got sick of the corporate world after a couple months. And you know, like Kristen said, like when you have that first child especially, like it really just is not what anyone told you. And then all the stuff that happens, you know, you're surprised you didn't know. You know, it's not like you live in a world without children. And so one of those experiences is taking your kid to the clinic. And my wife's there in the blue blazer there. And we had this terrible experience at the clinic at Fairview on University in Staten Village, U of M, where we went to the clinic 4 times for the same issue, and it ended up costing $664.28. And not on a single visit did anyone extend good old-fashioned business courtesy and say, you know, this one's on us. Like you've been here 3 times already. Like we're not going to charge you. Don't give us your insurance card. We'll just let you slip in. You know, like they took it every single time. And on top of that, our child was sick, you know, for 2 weeks with pneumonia before he was properly diagnosed, got the antibiotic, and recovered perfectly well. And and on this last visit, you know, I basically gave myself my own tour of the clinic unattended, and went to all the rooms. I opened up all the drawers. I tapped on everything that was in there. And when I got back to my wife, I was like, I can start a clinic like right now and run it better than these people, you know. And that's what happens. You know, we just started a clinic, and we just did it in a way that made sense and fully leveraged technology that was available to us to make the customer experience unforgettable, to bring the cost down to where it could be affordable for everyone, and also build a viable business as well. And I'm sure we'll talk more about my journey later.
Yeah, great.
If we could pass it back to Anila, would love to get into your story a little more. Just one follow-up to what Thompson said. I heard him share this story a bit, and I heard that his wife said to him on that occasion, like, who do you think you are walking around this clinic? He said, I think I'm me. That kind of tells you something about, like, all right, I'm going to figure out how to blaze this trail and get things done. And so it's a real testament to what I know all the people on this panel have been through of that process. And I think that hopefully that's a story that comes through, is like, the process of entrepreneurship and getting started isn't just about getting a check. That check in and of itself doesn't actually do anything. You still got to know what to do and how to do it and why you're doing it. And I think Anila and Habitaware is a really interesting story about the way that you came up with the idea. I'd love to just share more about that story, why it's a personal story for you, how the company was founded, and you have a really unique path of the incremental steps of progress and funding and experiences that I think would be great for the audience to hear.
Yeah, so sort of the origin story is, as I shared, I have a mental health disorder, which I actually hid from my early tweens up until around 4 years ago, which is when my husband, Samir, literally caught me without eyebrows, and I came clean with my hair pulling secret. And for him, he didn't really understand why I just didn't tell him. He didn't understand the shame and the fear of judgment that I was living with for so long. And so he took to the internet to try to understand a little bit more. And just one day we're sitting on the couch, and now he knows that I'm engaging in this behavior, and I'm just sitting there in this trance-like state, just pulling, and he gently grabs my hand, and I just turned to him and said, I wish I had something that notified me that wasn't you, because I want to punch you. And so we did it. I mean, we didn't do it. We tried. We're technophiles, but we're not. I have a background in advertising and project management and product management, and he's got an engineering and a finance background. But you know, for us, I had to get over the fear of sharing with many of you that I do this behavior and I need help to build this product. And the community really just sort of, you know, pointed us in the right directions in a sense. And we met our two technical co-founders that way. And then we built prototypes, and they kind of worked. And I was building awareness just with my hand going up to this area, the vibration, it being enough to wake me up and to allow me that opportunity to make a new choice. And yeah, we just kind of kept going baby steps. We're pretty methodical in that way of working nights and weekends, sweat equity, putting in our own money to do what little prototyping we needed to at that time. And then we went to a conference where we just took pre-orders. We just took their credit cards as, like, we didn't actually build them. We just said, we just want to see if people are willing to give their financial information to us. And they were. They were, between the kids and the adults with, you know, suffering from this issue, as well as the doctors that treat this issue, just people's eyes were lighting up, and it was just, okay, check, people want this, now let's go build it for real. And then we got into HACS, which is a hardware accelerator program based in Shenzhen, China. And they not only came to the table with investment, but more importantly, they came to the table with additional resources to help us actually build this. So John is our hardware engineer and our co-founder, and he's a phenomenal engineer, but without HACS's industrial designers and mechanical engineering and kind of being an extension of our team, what took us 3 months in China would have taken us a hell of a lot longer here in Minneapolis. And then from there we did a Kickstarter campaign, or rather a crowdfunding campaign on our website, where again we took credit card information, but we did not charge our customers. We charged them once we were shipping. So at that point, we had really just raised from ourselves, friends and family, HACS, a local angel here who believed in what we were doing, and we leveraged that to get our tooling and our manufacturing and our product to our doorstep. And then when we started shipping, we took that revenue in. And then that's really been the way that we have continued to grow our company, is taking that revenue, taking that profit, and reinvesting it into our growth plan.
I Thanks. That's a great story, and I think we'll get into some of like the follow-on steps beyond that of kind of where you were able to go from there. But basically, starting with an idea in hardware is hard. That's a whole different business, and so I think it's a fascinating and a testament to your persistence and just kind of your passion for it. Because I know it's a big part about the impact that the product can make, not just about what the technology is. So thanks for sharing that story. Back to Bryce. I was interested to hear kind of from your perspective, Indie VC, from your own ideas and the influence of where the ideas came from, but then how that has been received from founders and other venture capital, and as you've had kind of that perspective of a larger national conversation in your existing relationships, what have you seen kind of the trends of that space or how that's been received? I feel like you really put yourself out there with this model. Still VC, but not quite.
Yeah, I mean, I was having this conversation downstairs. People were asking me, like, what's the difference between OATV and Indie VC? The reality is, like, Indie VC isn't branded OATV because we didn't know Indie VC was going to work. And so we set it up as a completely different URL so that when no one applied, we could just put it down. And when people asked us about Indie VC, we could say, what are you talking about? I don't know. But no, I mean, Indie VC was something that it was in the back of my head for a long time. I was starting to feel like the promise of seed was going unfulfilled. There was a piece of seed that was that certainly had taken off, and that was this kind of idea that you could achieve a lot for a little and ideally bridge yourself to financing you wouldn't have had otherwise at those earliest stages because you could just do more with less. But I think what was becoming more and more apparent was that dominated what seed had the potential of doing, which was an alternative path of taking a little bit of funding and then getting to profitability and building something off your own steam. And so, I think I probably started writing about some of these ideas probably 7 years ago now. I gave a talk in Berlin about 7 years ago where I laid out this idea we call Declaration of Independence, ENTS. This idea of like there ought to be more support for independent entrepreneurs, there ought to be more independent kinds of companies, because what we were seeing is that at the earliest stages you were having to determine right up front, was this $1 billion business, right? And I think what in absence of actual provable information, what you end up relying on are patterns that have historically generated $1 billion ideas, right? People who've generated $1 billion ideas, archetypes that develop $1 billion ideas. And so what you now, with Zach kind of prefaced up front around kind of some of the statistics around where venture capital is deployed, what you hear in that is there's a kind of entrepreneur that's historically generated returns for investors. And so rather than do some of their own thinking, one of the hurdles they have to get themselves over, especially at the seed stages, what can I raise money for in 9 to 12 months, right? So that I can get my markup, so that my returns look great, but also what looks like what people on Sand Hill Road want to fund. And I think, that's bearing out in numbers now. That conversation has at least been elevated over the last few years around where those dollars are getting allocated. And so I think part of what drove this for Indie VC and where we wanted to go with it was, I don't think it was front of mind, but it certainly played out in our numbers, where now 4 years in, half of our portfolio is men, half of it is women, which is pretty unconventional in our industry. We have 20% of our founders are Black founders, in an industry where less than 1% of founders. I think what resonated in that was that, especially if you are, if you're someone who finds yourself in Minneapolis, Minnesota, right? For you to look at what's going on in Silicon Valley and try to replicate that in terms of how you're going to build your business is largely going to be a lesson in frustration. You're going to think there's a certain way you need to be doing this, and when you go into your accelerator, they're probably going to tell you all about what they've been reading about what's been going on in Silicon Valley, and I'll tell you right now, it doesn't apply here. Unless you build something substantial, unless you build something that Silicon Valley knows who you are, trying to run that same playbook here is a losing battle. But if you are that ambitious, where do you go? And there wasn't a place to go. And so that's what was driving us for NDVC. I think the challenge has been that venture capital, traditional venture capital, really has their own kind of monopoly on the way we talk about entrepreneurship, the way we talk about ambition, right? How do you know, when I come into a market, I start to ask, like, who are the anchor companies, and the stories that come out of that tend to be like, oh, well, this company's raised $100 million, or this company's raised this. Like, everything we do pegs the ambition or impact of a company to the amount of money that they're raising. And I think there's a part of this NDVC story. Zach was at my presentation in Chicago, and my very first slide was, do you remember what the first slide was?
I remember the one where not a halfway house for the unfunded.
That's the one. So, the very first slide as we introduce people, because what people tend to think about in NDVC is that we somehow have this really low bar, that we're designed to support people who can't raise venture capital, right? And I think that does what we're trying to do a disservice, and I think it does people like Thompson, who we work with, a disservice. I think it does the entrepreneurs we work with a disservice. We have entrepreneurs in our group that have now turned away more venture capital than most people raise in any given year. It's not that they can't raise money, it's they recognize there's value in forging a different path. And I think, you know, part of the challenge in developing it has been that all of the heroes we hold up in startups are the people who follow that kind of traditional path. And so part of our challenge, just from a messaging, from a credibility standpoint, is to start having stories, whether they come directly through us as investments or whether they're stories that we can help amplify in the startup community, where people can say, oh, that looks a lot more like what I want to build, or the way that I want to build it. There's plenty of people who sit on the sidelines, both in San Francisco and in St. Paul, Minnesota, which say, like, I don't understand, why would I give up control of my company so early? Why would I say that my #1 job is to raise money versus like just building stuff people really love? There's a lot of things that get caught up in that narrative of ambition that we've kind of taken whole cloth in terms of startups, that I think once people recognize they're not alone in questioning that, I think that's where the community can really start to come together. And I would say, you know, over the last 4 years, it's felt an awful lot like we're kind of pushing a rock up a hill to try to get people to say, I mean, we're in the longest bull market we've been in. There's more capital available for startups than ever. And yet we're telling people to raise less. We're telling people to take a different path. And so I think that over the last, I would say, really just 12 months is when people, or it feels like at least the conversation's been able to change a little bit. Thankfully, we're not alone in what we've been trying to do. You know, Rob was out there doing, you know, what he's been doing for years before he had a fund, before he was trying to create community for these kinds of entrepreneurs with MicroConf. And I think there hasn't been this larger kind of organizing principle, and I think we're starting to feel the momentum shifting a little bit. I know you guys just came through a really successful application process where you were overwhelmed with applications. We were able to see a significant number of applications for RB3. And so I think that the thing we diagnosed early on, seed, we had an ecosystem that we were plugging into, right? There were angels, there were VCs, we were just gonna kind of slot into this support network for startups that already existed. I think, you know, we've been kind of having to hand roll this community, and you know, and that's not to say we as in NDVC, but we as in like this community of people who think and want to build like this. There hasn't been an ecosystem, so it's been a very ground up, brick by brick, and that's a challenge. You know, it's a real challenge, but it feels like that work is starting to pay off now.
Thanks. If you could pass it to Thompson just to kind of continue on kind of with the NDVC and your working relationship. First off, I would say again, part of what made it possible is that people are sharing what they're doing online with posting their term sheets on GitHub and things like that, so that people like me can find, replace, copy, look at it and see what's actually going on. I think that level of transparency at least helps people know there are some different ways of going about it. So I really appreciate that. And I was interested to hear, kind of following on kind of that NDVC story. Thompson, obviously you have a long story with raising money and working through things, and I was curious to get a little bit more from your perspective into that side of the business, not just why you founded it and why Nice Healthcare, but kind of why take investment, why NDVC, what kind of how that plays in amongst your experience and kind of how it has been so far.
Yeah, so, after, the previous company, it's kind of like Voldemort there. And, we never say the name of the last company. We just refer to it as the last company. And so the last company, like a lot of people, like they ask me, are you afraid of VC? Like, would you ever take VC again? Is VC bad? And Abir Sen, one of my advisors, right after it happened, he was very angry for me, but he called me like a couple days later again, and he was like, Thompson, just remember that, VC is not bad in and of itself. There are businesses that aren't fit for VC, and then there are actually bad VCs, and I probably got the latter, was his statement to me. So, I was never afraid of VC, but certainly skeptical of it. Much more sensitive to giving up control. Definitely understood all the legal documents and the hundreds of pages that you're supposed to read through and sign. And Kevin is here, from Frederickson, and he was working with me during that tumultuous time when the company was forcing me out. It was 4 months after we closed on $7 million, and around that time, that we were closing was when I discovered Indie.vc, and I still remember reading about it, and I was like, oh shit, why didn't I find out about it sooner? I don't know why I stumbled upon it then. It was on Twitter, but hindsight, whatever. I wished I would have found it sooner, but actually I'm glad I found it, when I did, because things worked out pretty well. So even back then, I knew that the model of Indie.vc would be appropriate, for the type of company I was trying to build. But I already had $7 million, so I had to run with that. So, the whole thing happens, and, what happened for us is our previous customers came, and distributors came and asked us to restart the company. And initially I said no. I was working on another startup Relate, that Cloudburst was helping me get off the ground on a technology basis. But a lot of my friends, and including my wife, my mom, Clarence, from Upsea, they were all like, yeah, you got it, you should do it again, just do it. How many people get an opportunity to start the exact same company? With all the customers up front willing to pay you, if it's happened, I don't know about it. So it happened to me, and we started it, and I reached out to Indie.vc through the traditional channel, and said, hey, here's a story that fits what you're looking for exactly, and it wasn't Bryce, it was someone else, and they were just like, we don't do pre-revenue companies, you gotta have revenue, you gotta have traction, and he explained, he understood the story and everything, but they had to look at the second version, not at the last version, so that was okay, that was fine. We started it with credit card debt, borrowing money from friends, family, more credit card debt. And then, 4 months in, we were at, 400,000 ARR. And then I just tweeted so this time I decided not to go through the thing. I needed to get right to the man, in charge. And so I just tweeted at Bryce, and I was like, hey, we weren't ready for you 4 months, but now we're at, 400, in 4 months, I think we're ready now. And Bryce messaged me back. And it's funny that Kevin McArdle, he's besides my wife, they're the only two people that liked that tweet. That Bryce responded to me, but for us, is that tweet was very pivotal, because at that point, even at 400,000 ARR, I like to share numbers to make it real. At 400,000 ARR in our business, you're not at break even yet. You don't really get to break even until 750, with what we're trying to do in the healthcare space. And so, but we were just plowing ahead courageously with our eyes closed. We were just gonna make it work. So even though we didn't get the money to start it, we just went ahead. It's not like we had the money. we didn't have the money to start it. We had a few $100,000 that was like keeping us going. So we did need the Indie.VC money, and we had a product extension that we wanted to do that we just couldn't do without extra money. And we knew that because at this product extension, that it would just 10x the service. You know, it was pharmacy delivery, is what we're talking about. So that was what we wanted to use the funds for. So reached out to Bryce, he messaged me back, and over the course of about a month and a half, we had a few conversations on the phone, never met in person, and then we closed the deal last May. It was $350K on the V2 terms. At that time, luckily for me, I guess Indie.VC wasn't doing a batch mode, you know, so we could do it, you know, as we were going along. And I had to convince my co-founders that this would not become a repeat of last time. Like, that was the big fear. And even in talking to Bryce on the phone, I'm sure you could sense my hesitation. Like, I reached out to you, but maybe it was like I didn't even want to be talking to you. You know, because I was very concerned about control. Even though there's nothing in the V2 terms about control, you know, I wanted it to even feel right. You know, my last time with my VCs, like, it didn't feel right, you know, from day one. You know, but because of the narrative that we plugged ourselves into, we had to raise the money. We had $1 million seed round, so we had to get to the next thing, and the next thing, the next thing. And I just wanted it to be natural, like, just to be a very natural relationship. And I think it's pretty natural. I mean, this is the second time I've met Bryce in person, and really the first time we've had like a conversation longer than 30 minutes. And you know, after putting in that money, and it was very natural. I think, you know, it didn't feel weird. It felt like I was talking to someone. You know, my 8-year-old son knows Bryce's name. You know, he knows who he is. You know, so it's like it's just felt natural. That's what I would think what really solidified the deal for me is just it felt normal, because if you're going to be taking money from someone, it's going to be like a really long drive. Like, you're going to be in a very small space together, and so it has to feel right. And then the other thing I tell other founders about an investor or an advisor is that, and we were just talking about it today, is like they need to know how to talk to you. Like, you're a founder, but you're not a slave to an investor. You know, you're not a servant. You know, they need you as much as you need them. It's a symbiotic relationship, and there should be mutual respect. And just like in a marriage, you know, after a certain number of years, like, I know how to come at my wife with a difficult topic. You know, I'm not just going to come at it, you know, like with any old kind of attitude, you know, depending on the subject matter, right? You know, so it's the same thing with an investor. Like, you should be able to come at it, and Bryce knows how to, like, talk to me. And, like, we were just talking about it, you know, and then, like, say the thing that if someone else said it, like, I'd probably be like pissed off, or just totally ignore it. Like, you're garbage, you're dumb. Like, what are you talking about? But he says it in the right way. And I'm sure that you don't deal with every founder the same way, you know. And I think you want to look for an investor, just like any other relationship you're in, you know, that knows how to, you know, finesse the relationship, you know. And then me too. I need to learn Bryce and how to finesse that relationship as well.
Great. If we could just pass to Kristen. I think it's really interesting to hear kind of the variety of reasons that people start companies, and even for you with your experience of starting other businesses, having successful businesses going, yet you have this passion for something new. And one thing I know about you is in your core values are on growth and impact, and somehow you see that being a startup, a technology entrepreneur aligns with that. I would love to just kind of hear a little bit more about how you see that fitting into your own kind of personal values, and then why start something new? You already have good things going.
Yeah, you know, I think it really dovetails from the relationship piece. It's like you find yourself in a certain place in your life and you're working on something. And for me, I've always had to have a why. And when I have led any team in the past, when I hire, when I'm doing planning with the team, when I'm working with people, it's always the why and the North Star. And for a long time, I kind of had it in my profile that said, I don't micromanage anyone, and I certainly don't do well if you micromanage me. Like, I find a real magical place when you're able to communicate with people about what the goal is and then let everyone's best work come out and their point of view, and really creating that environment is so important. And so when I was, like I mentioned, when I was at Best Buy, I was able to work on different products where I was the sole owner, and I would pitch for funding, and I would have a few $1 million to work with, and I was the head of the team, and I actually had quite a few people I reported to where I had a lot of autonomy. And the thing about APIs is that people either know what they are or they don't, or they get them or they don't. So application programming interfaces are a really strategic way to be able to connect, and I think it's a really amazing thing that's happening in the startup community over the last 10 years is having open APIs. So now you don't even really need to know how to code to string together a prototype and to put something together. And and so I had a real vision for what I was working on, and for, you find yourself in the situation where you're building and then you look up and you don't actually have the control. And not that anyone ever has 100% control, but when you have a lot of autonomy and you build to your purpose and your focus, and you want to make an impact and you believe in what you're doing, and then the rug comes out from under you because either you get a new leader, or something changes in your landscape, or you get pushed out of your company, or something happens where you just caught flat-footed. And so as I continued to build teams and feel really passionate about the work I was doing, I realized that I was building them on these foundations that just didn't feel right. It felt really like sandy ground, because you just never know when a reorg happens. That's when I knew that I had really a different experience at Best Buy, when I got reorganized under a very organizational, a very corporate person, and they did not like me, and I did not like them. They didn't understand why I couldn't just check the boxes. Why are you so passionate about everything? Why does everything have to have a purpose? Why can't you just check the boxes? And I was like, dear God, how can you just check the boxes? It doesn't feel like how I want to live my life. And so, in my trajectory of working in different places, when I went to Leadpages as the head of product and I reported directly to the CEO, I thought, well, this is perfect. I have one person to go to now, all the autonomy. And I learned another good lesson there that, it's all about relationships. You really have to know who you're signing on to work with, whether you're reporting to them, taking venture capital. That relationship is so important. And so in building Mina, which is my main focus right now, I've realized and looked at the landscape about what I feel the most passionate about and where I want to have the most impact in the world. And when I look at diversity and hackathons and women in tech, I feel great about the work I've done, and really it's very important, but I want to work on a bigger scale and touch more people and be able to change people's lives. So working with Mina, what's really driving me is that this bonding experience that you have when you have a child is so important, and any little thing that breaks that bonding can really influence that person's life for the rest of their life. And so when a caregiver isn't properly cared, they don't have the proper care and support, then it's really hard to support and care for a young child. And the strange thing that we all have in common is that we are all born. So every single person, whether you decide to have children or not, you were once a tiny infant, and you would hope that whoever was taking care of you was well taken care of. And so then I just started weighing, you said you have successful businesses. I really had to sit down. I took a trip alone to Germany last year to do a talk, and it was in that trip when I was alone, away from my family, away from the day-to-day, and I thought, I'm doing a disservice to the mission that I'm trying to go after by running 3 different companies. This doesn't work. They're all slowly moving forward, and so I made this decision personally to go all in on really what I want to build and really what I want to do and who I want to do that with. And so, you take risks on yourself, you take risks on who you want to work with, and you start turning down the things that are great opportunities, but there might not be the opportunity that's going to go for the main thing that you're working on. And so, sometimes saying no to money, or saying no to opportunities, or even deals that you could have revenue. So having impact to me is more than just taking a deal or taking money. When we were building the first versions of Hello Mom, we put it out there. And the genesis of how that started is we put out a survey one day when I was really frustrated. We started this research project, and in 5 days, 900 people responded. And from that, we were like, wow, people are very interested in this. So then we started this text message service to serve these customers, and we put it out and thought, if we can get 100 people, maybe that's like a good way to assess if this works. And we had 2,300 people sign up. And in this process, we had 2 corporations start talking to us about working with them, and right away I knew it wasn't right. It didn't feel like we could fulfill on the mission and scale to the place that we wanted to. So it's like, it has to feel right, whether it's an investor, who you work for, at the company that you're gonna start. So yeah, now I really focused on building a business where I don't give up as much control to someone that has the potential to steer it to a different vision. So some of those examples might be getting a large audience and then just getting paid marketing to market to those people. That feels inauthentic to serving a true mission.
Thank you. I think I'm going to pass back to Anila. I know, one of our things in our conversation that you said that you had learned over your experience was, find out if it's a no and just kind of move on. I think it ties into what Kristen was saying, but I'd also be curious to hear from your experience. There are a lot of things that compete for founder time and energy, whether that's pitch competitions or networking events or all types of things, and you've had success in a lot of those and participated in a lot. I'd love to kind of hear your thoughts on which of those things you might encourage people to participate in, how they've been valuable for you, and kind of the things that you have learned about, well, if someone's not aligned with where we're going, how do you just move on and find the person who is.
Yeah. So I grew up being a people pleaser. So the whole VC environment of, almost chasing money and trying to fit what they want you to be, that's like what I grew up doing. Right? So it's like, oh, you want us to be this? Okay. But no, the reality is you have to stick to your mission. You have to stick to, we call them our Keen family, our customers. What they need is what's paramount to us. And yeah, we would go into VC meetings and you can tell right away, like, we're all talking about that gut feeling, essentially, of, are they interested? Do they care the way you care? Or are they just seeing dollar signs? And you can tell based on the way that they ask their questions. You can tell, like, how smart were those questions? Are you getting the same questions over and over where you're like, oh my God, not this again? Like, you can just kind of get a sense for where their heads are at. We were talking earlier downstairs about lack of vision. And immediately, as soon as we start getting questions like that, we're just like, okay, bye. Like, we don't need this money. This is nice to have. If we can get investment in at this point in our trajectory, it just helps us move faster. But we're at a point where we're rolling. What has worked for us, kind of, you gave a nod to, is we enter a lot of competitions. We enter a lot of awards. We were one of Time Magazine's best inventions of 2018. Like, that's pretty That's pretty awesome. We were the Minnesota Cup Grand Prize winners. That was a lot of non-dilutive funding. We have a research grant from the NIH. So there's a lot of other avenues to take to get funding that's non-dilutive, that allows you to stay in control and allows you to ideate and allows you to experiment. And so we do kind of look out for those kinds of opportunities, not just the, what's the check size of those, but what else can we get out of it? So with Minnesota Cup, it was around just the act of putting all of this stuff that was in Samir and Mai's head around our business plan, just putting it down on paper and now having something to reference, as well as the mentorship that we got from 2 amazing, serial entrepreneurs here in the Twin Cities. And with Mita, we just, the $400,000 from the $1 million challenge, again, it's, yes, having them as partners in our company now, but more so our businesses align in terms of mission. They're here to support underserved founders. We're here to support underserved mental health communities. And because those missions align, we know that we can walk that path together, and there won't be that sense of like, hey, this feels weird, and so those are the kinds of people that we look for, and the kinds of VC. I mean, really, it's people at the end of the day, right? Like, yes, Backstage Capital invested in us, but it was Arlen who saw me speak at a Gravity Summit, and it was her that said, hey, that person who just spoke, like, don't leave. And I had a 3-month-old child that I was gonna book it and go home and, you know, go to nap with him. And Samira was like, you can't leave. Like, what do you, like, she just said stay. I'm like, oh, okay. Like, you know, in my own zone sometimes in those ways. But yeah, I mean, it's people that immediately understand the impact that we're making that you have to focus on. You have to focus on the people that get you, the people that are gonna cheer you on, not the people that are questioning you in a way that shows that they are so far behind your level of thinking and your vision for what you're trying to build.
Thank you. Good pass back to Bryce. Part of the title of this session was called Founder Friendly Alternatives to VC, and so I was curious to hear kind of in your thoughts of like, so I understand some of the rationale behind the terms that you've set up in terms of optionality, and maybe you could say a little bit more about that model, however much you want to talk about kind of the way you structured that, but what founder friendly kind of means to you, and I'll be interested to hear from others on the panel of the types of things, because like Thompson said, not all VC is bad, it's not all not founder friendly, but anyway, just hear your thoughts on founder friendly and how that plays into what you're doing at NDVC, and then hear others' comments.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think, unfortunately, I think founder friendly these days means a high price, you know, and a lot of money. You know, I think ultimately, like, you know, when you talk to entrepreneurs about what founder friendly means, it's usually like, you know, how much can I get for as little dilution as possible? And I think that's a misnomer. I mean, I know right now there's a stark reality dropping across all of the startup community about the haves and the have-nots. There are people who were able to raise at one point at a very high valuation who are now having to see those, you know, massive valuations shrink significantly with inside rounds and ratchets and all that kind of stuff. But I think, you know, from a founder-friendly perspective, what we tried to do with our terms was really, you know, I think we've heard over and over experiences like the one Thompson has with Voldemort, where, you know, entrepreneurs, you know, you get this stack of documents that you don't fully appreciate, and in your mind you think, oh, this is really simple. I'm selling you 20% of my company for this amount of money. It means I'm worth this much on paper. But the reality is inside those documents are a lot of detail that entrepreneurs just gloss over and don't fully appreciate until those levers get pulled on them, right? You know, I think we celebrate this, you know, kind of founder buyout or the investor buyout that Joel from Buffer did, and I think it's great. But if you read the original post, Joel didn't want to buy out those investors. They had a clause in their term sheet that forced him to buy back their shares. And I think there's layers and layers of that in this document, in these documents that founders overlook because they're so anxious to get validated. They're so anxious to not be so constrained. And so what we try to do with our terms is just be wildly explicit. You know, we publish all of our terms right up front. And probably to the chagrin of most of the traditional venture community, we essentially, for all of the stories around how VCs screw over entrepreneurs, we've essentially given them the right to screw us over in a bunch of different ways. And in fact, as we were going through our latest version of the documents, you know, the attorneys we were working with who, you know, are well known for all the stuff they've done around the Series C documents, they were like sweating at a few of the decisions that we were making around control that we were giving to entrepreneurs. But I thought, you know, if we were going to build a, you know, an authentic relationships with the founders we work with, we want to let them know, you know, we want to be, you know, just wildly explicit around that they are in control of the relationship. And in our mind, that's what founder friendly is. Founder friendly is giving the founder control over their own destiny, and we've tried to structure our terms in a way where not only we give that to them up front, but as they see success or as they find we're not a partner for them, or, you know, as their business grows, we actually give them an opportunity to repurchase and own more of their company as they grow, not own less of it, is how we've structured our terms. And I think, you know, you don't know this after 2 phone calls with somebody and a term sheet and a quick close without ever meeting in person, but what we try to do is build a relationship where founder friendly isn't me telling Thompson that everything he's doing is great and that I'm slapping him on the back and we're high-fiving all the time. I mean, I think, what we figured out is that, I understand more, kind of where his blind spots are. And I think building a relationship where, he's going into a meeting or we're debating something about a decision that he wants to make, and I can point out something that maybe he hadn't thought through, or kind of pinpoint an emotion maybe that he's feeling that he doesn't fully appreciate. As you can see, Tom's a very passionate person, and so recognizing that that's great in some venues and not so great in others, and being able to work with each other in a constructive way, where they know that they're in the driver's seat, that they value the feedback that we bring. I think ultimately that's what we're getting at with Founder Friendly. I think the way we would probably rephrase the title of the talk would also be, in the way we've looked at how we structure our investments, is an equity efficient way of funding your company. I think, when you look at all these companies that are going public now, and you look at all these companies that are getting bought, in nearly every scenario, those founders are owning mid to low single-digit percentages of those companies. Those boards have been running those companies in effect for a long, long time. And sometimes those single-digit percentages really translate into meaningful outcomes for those founders. But if you look at Bill Gates, or you look at the richest people in the world, Amazon's Jeff Bezos, Bezos took one round of financing. That's it. The reason he's the richest person, sure, is he has built one of the most valuable companies, but he also owns 30+%, well, previous to the divorce, he owned 30 to 40% of one of the most valuable companies in the world. Bill Gates was in the same position. Yes, they built one of the biggest, most successful companies, but they also only raised one round of financing before they went public. Bezos understood cash flow. He understood how to equity efficiently fund his business with debt. And these are things that have completely been removed from the conversation around entrepreneurship right now, and it's something that we want to interject and be able to be a partner for entrepreneurs as they try to build these. In our mind, we're looking to help them build massively scaled businesses, but ones that they still own and control. And so we think that conversation of kind of equity efficiency, and founder friendliness, that all dovetails together into our expression of that, which is our most recent version of our investment terms.
Great. Does anybody else want to comment to that topic of founder friendly? Or, yeah,
So as I've been thinking about what founder friendly means, it's also, do you share the same vision with somebody who is investing or who you're partnering with? Are you going in the same direction? Because if you're at odds with the goals of what the outcome is or what you want, are you working towards like quarterly earnings, or are you working towards a bigger profit, a bigger growth trajectory? So like with Amazon, they're always in this hyper growth mode of the long term and working on the long tail, and that's how they've been really successful. Where there are other companies that are always catching up or doing digital transformation, or what kind of company do you want to be? So that's a really important question to me. So when you think about legacy or terms or money, it's the same thing like with project management. It's like time or budget or scope, like you're always giving on something. So if you're not aligned with anyone that you're partnered or who is investing in your company, then that feels not founder friendly to me. If you feel like you need to be on the same page.
Yeah, I also just reiterate what Bryce said on the importance of control, especially for people who are raising right now. It's so important that you maintain control of your company in the early days, if you want. If you don't want to run your company anymore, then I suppose that's not as much of an issue. But if you have any inclination to make decisions, within your own company, be really careful about things that you sign. And even for me, when we read the V2 terms, like I told my co-founder, I was like, wow, I can't believe there seems to be something missing here. Like there should be something here, that says this thing, if that, and then that. And it wasn't there. Like you could read it, it was plain language. You know, compared to Series A docs, it was just a breeze to read. It wasn't crazy long. And but if you know what it could have looked like, they were definitely founder friendly on the control side. You know, and just an amazing amount of optionality. And the people that I advise today, you know, I tell them that like right now, when you're like struggling to get your first customer or second customer, you know, or maybe you've hit just enough traction to raise money from people, that control doesn't seem like that valuable. Like it seems like cash, like you just want cash, you know, money, you know, or you want more customers. And if you start thinking that way, then message me on LinkedIn because and I'll remind you, you know, about how important control is, even in that moment where it feels like cash is the most important thing. And the way I ended one of my last talks when the previous company went down is I said that before you raise capital and get kicked out of your company, you think the worst thing that could happen to you is running out of cash. But there's actually much worse things, you know, than running out of cash. You know, at any point in your company, especially if things are going well.
Thanks. Did you have any?
I would just add for founder friendly, for us, what I sort of perceive it as is adding more value other than just the capital, right? So with Hacks, it was extension of our team. With our angel advisors, they are in healthcare, and just that advisory with anything that comes up, we can shoot them an email, and they're, you know, responsive and willing to answer our questions. And even with Arlen and Backstage, it's sort of more of like on a PR perspective of kind of sharing us on Twitter and helping us stay top of mind for other people. But I think that's also really important, that they're supporting you in other ways other than here's a check, you know, go make me money kind of thing. But here's a check, and we're going to help you rise.
Great. So I kind of was interested to follow up on kind of the role of the founder in the company, how important that is. And I've heard it kind of say there's really 3 jobs for a founder: set the vision, build the team, and raise the money, or basically fund the business one way or the other. And I was curious, you know, part of our conversation is around kind of alternatives and yeah.
Founder-friendly options, and making it more accessible to more types of people. And so I kind of wanted to come back to that conversation around the panel, specifically the founders, and whether your experience as a woman or a mother or a person of color or from New York or whatever the case might be has made it, you know, easier or harder contributed to your success in any aspect of the vision, the team, the funding, and if there's any insights from that experience that you could share that might be helpful to other people as they're seeking to do the same thing.
Yeah, so like vision, team, or funding, those kind of 3 categories that a founder spends their time in. And I know a couple of people made comments to me tonight that they're surprised to see me here, because you know how I don't like to socialize. You know? I'm like Badger in Wind in the Willows, if anybody remembers that children's book. And he just simply hated society. And so, I mean, I don't go out. You know, I work on my startup, I hang out with my wife, and, you know, take care of my children. And so for me, like, the way I spend every minute is really important and very well thought through. And I get really irritated when there's any type of deviation or disruption to what I had planned for said minutes. And for me, certainly it's team, I'll say hiring and culture, kind of intertwined together, because man, like once you get past one person, like culture and personalities, doesn't matter how well aligned people are, needs to be cultivated, you know, like a garden. It doesn't matter how good your soil is or your plants or your seeds, like you gotta weed that thing, you know, and water it, you know, and get sunlight in there. And it has to be someone's prerogative and job to do that. And I think at the earliest stages, the founder is the best person to do that. Certainly getting money. I think in the context of this conversation, getting money from customers trumps getting money from investors. but sometimes you do need some outside investment. So yeah, it is the founder's job, in my opinion, to make sure that the checking account doesn't get below zero for more than 24 hours at a time. You can make it work. You can wiggle in there. So I mean, yeah. So I mean, that's my job. Like my co-founders, I have 2 co-founders, and they don't have to worry about money. Like they don't worry about money, and it's my job to know exactly how much money we're going to have at any point in time for the next 24 months, and to hold us accountable to getting there. And eventually, when we're big and fancy, we'll have a CFO that does that. But for now, I'm playing both roles: the money coming in, money coming out, monitoring that very carefully. And then the last one was
Well, the vision, the team, and the money.
so yeah. So vision's pretty obvious. I think don't need to labor that. So I agree with that. Like that's the founder's job. I think it'll be interesting once we hear from other founders or Bryce to maybe share a little bit about the conversation that we just had in the car, before we came in here, about the founder's job and blind spots, and like even I don't mind sharing like my blind spots and kind of the conversation that we had.
So you also mentioned a little bit about our identity and how that comes into play.
What you have had in your experience, if you felt like it's helped or hindered you in aspects of doing what you've done.
Yeah, let's see. So I've built a lot of teams. I love hiring. I love forming a team. And I'm really comfortable in kind of some of the areas you described, like skating on is the bank account at zero for like 24 hours. And in the teams I've built, I've watched people around me be less comfortable with things like that. There was an instance where there's a room with 60 women at the hackathon, and so I was like, as you have an idea, start lining up over here, and then I was explaining the pitch, and no one's lining up, and then I'm like, and then if you have an idea, start lining up, and I'm kind of toggling back and forth between the instructions and what I want them to do, and never in that moment was I worried or felt discomfort or nervous. It was like, I live for this kind of thing. And afterwards, the person who was with me working on the bench, she was like, I was panicking. How did you know somebody would walk up with an idea? And so in that area of just like resilience and not being afraid to go this direction and try things, as a founder, it's like, I kind of think if we had money earlier on with some of our ideas, we probably would have gone into a hole of that idea, and it wasn't going to work. So we found out because we had to be scrappy and we had to be resilient, and so then that sort of led us into understanding new insights. So every time a certain direction we were going failed, I felt this resilience of, well, we learned this, so this is where it'll take us. And everybody talks about pivots, but no one really talks about those pivots usually come with a lot of failure and just this idea of resilience. And so after a while, I kind of realized with teams I was working with that I tended to be the only person who felt comfortable in this discomfort. And one of my friends finally came to me. She'd become friends with me after we worked together several times, and she was like, Kristen, sometimes I look at you and it's like you're standing in front of an ocean that knocks you over, and I don't understand how you get up every single time and keep going. And so I think that's something that is like in your DNA, to be resilient if you're going to be in this game of pivoting till you find the right market fit, or being okay with skating on how long can you have $0? Is it 24 hours? Is it 20 hours? Like knowing all the rules, knowing how to navigate through that. And I think a lot of experiences that I've had in my life has led me to that, and certainly being a woman in tech has, being in a room, raising money, and going to the C-level of folks at Best Buy and walking in, and there's 30 people in the room, and you are the only woman pitching your funding request, and the only other woman in the room is a assistant taking notes. Like, you start to feel comfort in the discomfort, and I think for me, I must have been just destined for this, because I lived in 12 different houses before I turned 18. So I was constantly in a state of resilience as a child, and now as it's navigating different rejections, because as you apply to a lot of things, you get turned down to a lot of things. As you pivot from something that's not working to something else that's working, sure, that one's going to work, and then maybe that one doesn't. So you have to be able to meander and lead the team, and always renewing the vision and making sure that the team is funded, whether it's funded from different areas of VC or competitions, different partnerships. So always making sure that you're kind of balancing all three of them.
Yeah, if you're up to speak a little bit, Bryce, I'm kind of following what Thompson was saying and maybe the conversations that you've had or what you've seen and you're working with founders in those different areas, or however you like, that'd be great to hear.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the great advantages you have as an investor is you aren't in the day-to-day, and so you can, conversation we were having in the car right before we came in here was like, what are the holes in the team? Like if, we were talking about where nice healthcare can and should be in the next 10 years or the next 3 years. And so what are the holes on the team that are gonna hold you back from being able, Tom's a smart guy, but he's also in the weeds on his company every single day, and he's got his hair's on fire about 20 other things besides thinking about, some strategic hire a year out, or his head is so far into his bank account that he can't see how in the world he could bring on someone who he knows he needs, but he doesn't know that he needs them right now, type of thing. And so, I think one of the advantages of being an investor is to be able to pull back, because I think as a founder, it's really, it's easier to talk about vision and team building and culture, and but the reality is so many founders spend the vast majority of their time worrying about the money and figuring out how to raise money. And you've gone to enough of these events, all of you in here, and you've built your own companies, and 80+% of the conversation of these things is about raising money. 80% of the conversations you have with other founders is generally about raising money. So, one of the things we've tried to do with NDVC is put entrepreneurs in a position where, the day that Thompson called me and said, hey, look, we crossed over to cash flow positive. Like, we don't need to raise any more money anymore. And the momentary relief, at least, that came through the phone, as an investor, it's something you don't hear when someone raises a Series A. What you hear when someone raises a Series A is like, holy crap, now I have to pay back 100 times this and this valuation. How am I going to, it's not relief versus hearing someone say, okay, now I don't have to raise money. Now what do I really want to build? And maybe I do end up maybe I do want to raise more money because I want to move some aspect of it, but I don't need to do it. And so I think that one of the great joys that I've had, at least in this kind of new chapter of OATV and NDVC, is that conversation, right? Where we can actually where their head's actually able to go to higher order things, and where we can be a real advisor to them to point out potential blind spots, point out risks in team culture and other aspects of their business. It's really hard to do when someone's like, I gotta raise money again, I gotta raise money again.
Thanks, and Anila, even just to kind of continue on that thread of those aspects of being a founder, and even if there's been aspects of your identity or similar experiences with raising money or going through that experience of the startup, that's been informational and instructive.
Yeah, I mean, I think just to, Thompson kind of hit it on the head in terms of vision and team. And for me, vision is about what you want, what your customers want, right? And so if you're continually listening to them and if you're leveraging that information to build the best product you can, then you're going to be able to sell more of it. And again, you won't need the money from a VC, but it'll be that nice to have to help you push farther, or start tackling some ideas that may be on the back burner that you can see leading to a higher vision. And then in terms of kind of what we've seen sort of in the VC in those conversations, I think it's honestly, no one's ever going to tell you straight to your face, we're not going to invest in you because you're XYZ, right? So it's in the subtleties, and I think for us, it's really, we don't fit the bill in terms of we're not healthcare, we're direct to consumer, we're not, in terms of what our product is, right? It's a hardware product, which already rules a lot of VCs out. So there's a lot of layers to what we're doing that sort of you can't put us in a box and say this is what we are. So I think that's a challenge for VCs. Based on questions that I've gotten recently, I'm gonna guess that being married to my co-founder is an issue, is maybe an issue for some people. For me, it's not. It's my culture. It's, you know, I've grown up in, all of my friends and family all own family businesses, and that's just how it is. Like, so it's just, that's probably a cultural thing. So those are kind of the two things that I really see in terms of our, quote unquote, I'm using the term diversity very loosely in that sense of the product we're building doesn't fit the mold. And, you know, I think that our founder relationship, but you said it, if you're founders, you're married to each other. The four of us, me, Kirk, John, Samir, we're married to each other. Like, we're in this together. We need to build that family. So if that is an issue, I just don't get it. Yeah.
Thanks, Mary. Yeah.
I think you can hear from the stories, and what I know is the kind of the lived experience of a lot of people in this room is you'll find a lot of things that kind of seemingly stand in the way or would stop you or need to find another direction. And I think to some point that Thompson said earlier, and it has been my experience, a lot of times running into that roadblock makes you rethink it, makes the power of constraints make you think about how you're going about things and really reaffirm your commitment and your team's commitment to what you're doing. So really appreciate hearing the insights from the panel, and I have plenty of questions. I was telling myself when we were going to have this event, I thought, well, if nobody else shows up, I'm going to have a really fascinating conversation and lots of food. So I'm glad that the audience is here, and I'm sure that there will be some questions. There want to make time for questions anyway from people in the audience if you wanted to ask the panel. And just to check in on time, you know, we were going to say ending at 9, so people certainly welcome to make whatever commitments they need from personally, but we have a little bit of flexibility. I like to keep the conversation with the panel and the structured Q&A at least another 15 minutes. Maybe we see where we go, but I also have some time for conversations afterwards. And also just wanted to acknowledge that, you know, this could have been a full day event. It could have been a multi-day event. I think there's a lot of people in the community, also in this room. I know Rob Walling was mentioned in Tiny Seed here in town, which is fantastic. They have remote accelerator that's operating in this space, which is fantastic. Stephanie Lewis and Elaine Rasmussen, I don't think they're here, but they're starting a integrated capital fund for entrepreneurs. David Duccini, I think I saw David from Silicon Prairie crowdfunding portal. It's fantastic, and some of his team. Venn Foundation has kind of program-related investments for social ventures. And Hill Capital has got a unique kind of equity-based notes model. All this is happening in the Twin Cities. So just wanted to say that there's a lot going on in this space, a lot of opportunities, and we'll want to continue that conversation. But for tonight, would love to turn it over to questions from the audience. And I think I saw Kevin's hand.
Yeah, I just ask Bryce if you could give a little bit more detail on exactly how the terms of NDVC works, because I haven't read them before. And then also, what is the fund? What's your exit model, and what, how are you expecting it to turn out as far as an IRR compared to a typical venture fund?
So the question was, how do we structure our investments? So what's kind of unique about the NDVC terms, and then kind of what our expectations around returns look like in terms of cash back to our investors. So the first one is, we essentially have a convertible note with a release valve, right? And so in the case that most convertible notes are designed for, which is raising another round of financing or having the company purchased, in that case we look and act just like a convertible note. So we fix a % up front around how much we'll own if the company converts, and then we convert into that if they raise. So, but rather than a cap, we have a fixed percentage that we set. In the event they don't, and so far, only a few of our companies have chosen to go on and raise money. Then after a set period of time, usually it's 24 to 36 months, we start doing a revenue share with those companies, so anywhere between 3 to 5% of gross revenue. The kind of unique piece in V3 terms was that with each revenue share payment that you make, your equity option decreases. So it looks like a redemption. So when you make your first payment out of your revenue share, let's say we set a 10% equity option, now our equity option is 9 point, whatever that is, right? So that's what makes it different, that's what makes it unique. It is explicit around the optionality that our entrepreneur is trying to preserve, and it also provides liquidity for us in the event that you don't raise or sell, right? I think there are a lot of different ways that people want to build their businesses. I think we've had experiences even in our own kind of traditional portfolio where people get to the point where they have a real business, but they also have a really awful cap table that's sitting on top of them, right? And so what we want to do is, that leads to a bunch of things that are often called fire sales, acqui-hires, those types of things. So we wanted to put entrepreneurs in a position where if they're actually running a business they could see themselves running for a long time, we give them a way out where we're not some albatross or our interests aren't aligned with them. So that's the terms and how we structure it. How we get a return looks an awful lot like how we've historically gotten them. I mean, there's nothing in how we structure our investments that would prevent someone from scaling a company, selling a company. We'd convert into equity, we'd get a return back on that capital. But we also have, for instance, 2 weeks ago, we received our final payment from a company that was in our first batch of companies we did. The terms she had, we received a 5x return on our original investment. So we invested $100,000, she paid out $500,000. That was a 5x return to us. It was a 50+% IRR return for us on that one investment, and that returned half of the capital that we deployed in that first batch. So in that batch, though, we also still have a company this year that's on track to do 21 million in revenue this year, all on less than $1 million raised. And we have a wide range of companies. All 8 of those companies are still in business, and so we can see a path forward for some of them, or we could see some of them being full-on fund returners for us. But we can also see a path where we get a 5x return, and we still have some equity upside in that business. But to be frank, it's still a work in progress. We don't really know how it's going to all play out, and that's the risk we knew we were taking when we stepped out to do something a little bit different. But so far, it appears to be working on a bunch of fronts.
Thanks. Other questions out there? Aaron?
At what point, what's your ideal founder? And I know that's a sort of crazy question. At what point does a founder come to you and you say, okay, this is a good fit for NDVC? Can you talk about that in terms of revenue or product market fit, or how would you describe that?
So the question was what's an ideal founder, or what's the best way to kind of approach us for NDVC investment? And apparently it's just Twitter. Just tweet at us, we'll figure it out.
Not the mechanism to reach you, but
What's the profile? What stage does the company need to be at? Thomson came to us doing 400K ARR. I would say I think when we did our V3 tour, we had averages. So I think I think it was somewhere in the mid 200K range. We don't have a floor. There's no too early. I think you'll see. We'll make an announcement around what our V3 group looks like, and you'll see in some of those we have companies that are doing 400+K a month in MRR right now. So we have multiple millions in revenue, and we have some that are doing single-digit thousands in revenue right now. So it's really for us. There aren't a lot of boxes to check other than, are you post-revenue? What does your cap table look like? We don't want to be on a cap table where you have a bunch of traditional investors, and we're going to be kind of doing this dance where they're going to be pushing you to go raise. I mean, it probably wouldn't surprise you, but it even surprised me how many conversations we had during this batch process of people who'd raised money and who we were interested in talking to, but whose board completely controlled the company and the entrepreneur's decision, even after just a seed round of funding. In terms of other profile, it's post-revenue. It's we look for things that are what we would consider directionally correct but out of favor, right? So we're still looking for big, interesting companies, but there are a lot of categories that just fall out of favor. If you were trying to do a VR startup 4 years ago, you probably had a bunch of term sheets getting thrown at you. 4 years later, no one wants to even talk to you, right? Blockchain is now coming back into vogue, but it's been out of favor for a long time. Education is one where people don't understand it. They've lost money in it. Hardware is another one where you can't point to a lot of big venture scale hardware returns that people have seen, and so we tend to look for that. I would say what I love about how this ecosystem is shaping up around how to support entrepreneurs like this is we are bringing our perspective, which, you know, the seeds for this idea came from, like, when I look at venture capital, we get the same number of breakout companies every year for the past 30 years. Those drive all the returns for the industry, and we've kind of settled around one way to nurture those. So part of our idea is, like, how do we create more of those? How do we create, like, more big breakout companies versus other people who are coming at it from the totally opposite direction, which is like, I'm a bootstrapper. And it was really hard and unnecessarily hard, and I had to do so much on my own. I didn't have support, I didn't have this network. So I think you're getting all of these different perspectives and different filters and different qualifiers for what people are looking for. We're probably looking for that thing that needs a better, kind of longer gestation period for it to really break out, and a different kind of founder who's going to need to clear a higher bar to really achieve what it is they're trying to build. But in terms of, like, nuts and bolts filters, you know, we had, like, a tongue-in-cheek thing that said we don't want to work with founders who like single-digit percentages of their businesses, right? Like, it's really like it's pretty loose. There isn't a whole huge filter, other than we found that when we did take pre-revenue companies, it felt really good to have thousands of people apply, but there's a lot of junk. And we also found that, like, working with someone pre-revenue, they just didn't get the benefit out of what it is we were trying to do versus the person who, like Thompson, was feeling this acute pain. He had a very specific thing he was trying to get launched with his pharmacy delivery. And so that was something we knew how to solve, and he figured out, you know, so much of the rest of it.
Thanks.
Of course.
I think I'd interject a question if there's not someone else.
Just asking for a friend. But from what I know of people in the room and people that I come into contact with all the time in the work that I do at Cloudburst, I would be curious, what would you recommend as options or ways to get started for someone who has the idea, who has that passion, maybe has only, say, $5,000 worth of capital, and that could be go learn how to code. There's a range of recommendations, but how would it be with someone with very little money, acknowledging that there's a level of privilege around having even access to credit cards and digging yourself into a hole? Some of us have that luxury. The other question on that is, how might that change if they had $50,000? There's some fundamental principles about kind of how to get started, some of which are most acute when you have lowest capital, but also more broadly. So just from your experience, what would you recommend for someone who's just getting started?
You know, people are really surprised to hear when I talk about the first version of the Hello Mom text messages that we built it pretty much just with piecing together this and that and the other thing. So a little bit of Twilio, a little bit of Typeform, and we actually talked a lot about this in building Hello Mom. It's like, get out there with the scrappiest thing you can to see if there's any traction. I think the more money you have, it's almost dangerous. It's like to constrain yourself, because I do build prototypes for other people, and a lot of times I try to really encourage them to stop spending so much money on the prototype and really just get it in the hands of people, even if it's super ugly. But yeah, just that scrappy, how do you string one thing together to the next thing? So if you have $5,000, you know, spend 500 only. Because you're gonna have to keep kind of moving things along and try and do things with the smallest amount of thing, even Google Sheets and Twilio and Typeform.
Yeah, I would say something that some of my other advisors have said to me is, like, treat it like it's the last money you'll have, like whatever the amount is, like just whatever mental trick you have to use, you know, just get yourself to believe that you will not get money from anyone else, and everybody hates your product and your company. Which is pretty true in the early days, but that's the way it feels, you know. So as long as you kind of internalize that, then you'll treat the money as such. When we took the first, that 350, you know, from Indie.vc, our whole company, we just said we're going to get to break even on this 350, and this is how long it's going to take. And the date, you know, was January, you know, 31st, you know, 2019. so every decision that we made around that, even with the 350 in the bank, had to, you know, get us to that point, because then we knew once we got to break even, we'd have a lot more optionality in what we could do.
Yeah, I would just add to what Kristen said about prototyping. So before we even moved to hardware, to a technical product, we said, okay, is this idea of knowing where my hands are actually going to help me change my behavior? And so we went to Michael's and we started lo-fi, and we got jingle bells and a slap bracelet and another heavy bracelet, and every time I went up like this, the big heavy bracelet clanked down onto the jingle bells, and I was being notified that I was engaging in my behavior, and so was everyone else in my ad agency. And I was like, okay, this is actually working. So now let's move to prototyping and using off-the-shelf hardware before you start going custom. And we took really janky prototypes to this mental health conference and 3 printed cases, and they did not care. They were like, can we take that home? We're like, no. But they were ready, and so just keep kind of iterating. And you know, you said your question was you have a startup idea and $5,000. So first, make sure that someone wants it before you spend $1. Like, make sure that there is that customer out there that's willing to give you their credit card right there and then for the shittiest version of your product, because then you know you're onto something, and then you know that 500 or 5,000 or 50,000 that you spend is going to be well worth it.
Awesome. And maybe Bryce, if you could say kind of along the continuum of funding stages of kind of how it's evolved from pre-seed and seed and all the different terms kind of what you've seen for maybe benchmarks at a certain point. Part of what I see is a lot of people investing time in pitch decks and trying to align with competition deadlines and things, but with not having the validation from the market yet. And so I think people's time is really valuable, their money is valuable, and what have you seen of trying to align their kind of, here at this stage, this might be the right thing to be looking at, and you're gonna probably have to get to this level.
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, let me answer the first question first, because if you follow the Instagram account or our Twitter account, you would have seen an article we tweeted out a couple of days ago about the founder who actually paid back her 5X. It's a woman named Angelica Nwandu. So Angie founded a company called The Shade Room, and The Shade Room is like a media site. But what ended up happening is Angie was an accountant at a mechanic shop in LA. She lived in a terrible neighborhood. She didn't have a lot of options, but she had this idea that there were people like her that mainstream media wasn't talking to. So she took the $5,000 she had. She couldn't build a website. She didn't know how to build a website, so she started an Instagram account. That Instagram account now has like 16 million followers. Angie threw off probably $3+ million in cash last year. She took $100,000 from us and never spent it. She turned away 4 term sheets last year that I know of that she bothered even talking to me about, because so many people were throwing them at her. And that was all from a deeply, you know, someone who doesn't know anything about startups, still doesn't know what Y Combinator is, right? She has no idea, but $5,000 was able to build some. Now, but not everybody can do that. I would say the, you know, the hurdle for funding these days, I would say it's seed and Series A, or pre-seed or mango seed or mustard seed or whatever, however we're staging things now. You know, I think if you've worked at Google, Facebook, you know, any of those, you can raise, you know, you're probably pretty good through your seed and Series A rounds. And people will give you a pretty big pass. You know, I think that I'm always shocked at who is able to raise funding, how much they're able to raise with how little they've actually accomplished. It is I think you would be shocked. I think so many of the companies that you think are killing it right now are actually terrible businesses that have a great storyteller at the head of it and have somebody who looks credible. But from a, you know, from a fundability standpoint, I think what you're starting to see now is a kind of pre-seed. You have a working prototype. You have something that someone, whether they're, you know, paying for it or not, you have people using it and at least validating. I think at a seed round, you've got, tens of thousands, maybe 100,000+ in revenue. The hard part about all this stuff is like, ask me in 3 weeks what it is, right? Like if you look at SaaS companies, a year ago it was like, oh, if you have 100K MRR, like you're good to go. Like you can kill it with a fundraise. Now it's like 500K MRR to be able to raise a seed round or something crazy like that. And so I think the goalposts are always moving. So I think it's a little dangerous because people tend to aim for the target you give them. And I think especially when it comes to startups and how malleable entrepreneurs try to be to kind of fit into what it is investors are looking for instead of just building the thing they know customers want and then satisfying that. And so, I think the question we try to get people to ask isn't, whether they're at the right stage or whether they're a right fit for investors, but whether investors are the right fit for them and where it is they are and what it is they're trying to build. I don't think enough people ask that. I think they're so quick to ask, like, am I fundable yet? Am I fundable yet? And the reality is, like, the numbers, 0.6% of people raise any venture capital at all, so the default is no. No, you are not fundable for the most part. And if you can internalize that and just take some of that out of the conversation, I think it would be a lot more productive and people would actually get a lot more done if they weren't so tied up in what this milestone's on. Because frankly, I don't know. I mean, that's the beauty of why I've shifted so much focus to NDVCs. I have no idea what the hurdles are anymore. All of my energy is going into getting our companies profitable, not trying to figure out like where the market is right now for what it is they're doing. And I think the interesting thing is the less our companies need to think about that, the more investors come interested in writing checks.
Great, well, I think that's a good energy to end on for the formal portion. Certainly we'll stick around for a bit for questions. I'm sorry we didn't quite get to everything, but really appreciate everyone being here tonight. We're going to continue this conversation, certainly. Please continue it tonight. We'll stay in touch, and please join me in thanking a fabulous panel this evening. It's been fantastic to hear the insights. These are hard-earned stories and people putting themselves out there and sharing publicly, trying new things, being willing to fail and willing to share. And I think we can all take a lesson from that. As far as logistics, I think we have the space till roughly 9 or shortly after, and should just be able to get out the way you came. But I don't think we can get back into the 4th floor. So just as a heads up, if you get locked in a stairwell, tweet at us or something, and we'll try to figure it out. But thanks again.